Hello, good evening, and welcome to tonight's event. I'm here to introduce you to Wing Commander David Montenegro. Now, David is the author of a new book. Got it here, The Red Arrows, the official story of Britain's iconic display team. I'm Patrick Bishop. I'm an old Telegraph foreign correspondent, now a military historian. I write quite a lot about RAF history. Now, this is a special event. It's for exclusively for Telegraph readers. And before we kick off, I'd just like to run through a few little housekeeping points, really about how the thing works. Now, first of all, the video. You're looking at the video full screen, but you can make the video full screen. If you go down to the bottom right-hand corner, there's a little square there. If you press on that, that'll make it full screen. This is a kind of interactive thing. So if you want to ask any questions, if you scroll down, you'll see there's a box at the bottom there, and you can type in your questions. These will be fed through to me, and I will put them to Wing Commander Montenegro later on. Now, don't worry, you can see us, but we can't see you. So if you want to walk around in your underwear, that's fine. No one's going to see you at this end. Now, we're delighted to have with us Wing Commander Montenegro, the author of this excellent book. I reviewed it in the Telegraph a little while ago. Really fabulous read. He is the officer commanding the legendary and amazing Red Arrows. He's known better to his colleagues as Monty. Is it okay if I call you Monty tonight?
Indeed, Patrick. Yes, that's how I'm known.
Okay. Well, Monty joined the RAF from Manchester University in 1999, and after qualifying as a fighter pilot and flying operationally in various theatres, he won a highly coveted place as a member of the Red Arrows team, joining it in 2009. He was on it for 3 years. He returned again later, I think in 2015, for another stint when he ended up being Red One, which is the kind of lead pilot, the guy that's actually at the apex, if you like, of all the displays. He's now officer commanding the whole Red Arrows show. Now, you all might have seen him a week ago, but you'd have seen him at a distance because Monty was at the controls of one of the Hawk jets that we saw. We can see it now, approaching the Mall, I suppose. And this is such a fabulous image. Is this from your cockpit, Monty?
It is, Patrick. This is taken from my cockpit by a young 22-year-old engineer who's sitting in my back seat, actually, as we were en route to RAF Fairford. And you can just see in the imagery there as we go over St James's Park and over the palace.
Well, it's a fabulous image. It really puts you there. But you weren't actually supposed to be there, were you? You weren't meant to be flying that day. Is that right?
Indeed, my role as the officer commanding means that I'm not in the Reds 1 to 9. I take overall chairmanship, if you like, and command of the squadron. However, on this occasion, we added Red 10 and Red 11, which is my airborne call sign these days, to the fly past. So that had me having to do a quick workup. It's what I love about flying. It doesn't matter how much experience you have. It's all to do with your recency. And our skill set is very perishable. So I had to regain my competency back into the formation to make sure that fly past in particular was as perfect as can be. So I very much enjoyed that, and it was wonderful to be back, not being the lead aircraft this time, but being on the end of the wing, probably working even harder, I think, to make sure that V shape was as excellent as it could be.
And I suppose being the boss, all eyes were on you, so that you were feeling a bit of extra pressure there. Now, something that occurs to me is that when you're looking at these images, do you feel insulated? You know, all these people are down below looking up at you. Is there a feeling that you're slightly remote from the spectacle that you're creating?
You do. We very much are within our mission bubble, synonymous with any RAF airborne task, where your mind is purely focused in the now and delivering what you need to do. But there is one seat in the house that I think offers you an element to momentarily take it all in, and that's from Red One's cockpit, because that pilot is looking out the front. All other eyes are on the lead aircraft. But I had experiences as Red One, particularly flying down the Mall, where as soon as you actually see the Mall very late as you do the running from the east, but once you get on top of it and you see the massive crowds in the general public. They are images kind of burnt into your retina, I think, for the rest of your life. But yeah, you are completely detached. You are concentrating purely on the task, and it's only when you land, step out the aircraft, and then in today's world, start to allow yourself to take in some of the media, do you get a sense of what the achievement was.
Yeah. Um, Now, let's begin at the beginning. In your book, you talk about rather touchingly about your the first moment when you thought, "Hey, this is for me." This flying life is me. Can you tell our viewers here how that came about?
It did, yeah. Well, it came about when I was around 7, 8 years old. My father is actually from Colombia. My mother is British, and we were en route to Bogota and then to the relatively small town where my father's family is from, called Pasto, in the southwest of Colombia. And on one of the domestic flights, it was it was quite a rickety old aircraft. I don't know what aircraft it was, but I remember the pure fear, particularly in my mother at the time, that I fed off and thought, well, it's the first time I think I've ever seen my parents relatively nervous. And for me, it was just an adrenaline rush. And I thought everything about the commercial aspect, long haul flying, the domestic flight, was just very exciting. And at that hook, I think, grew and grew into my teens. And it, it became a dream of mine to be able just to go flying. I hadn't established exactly what that might be, whether it be as a commercial pilot, a private pilot, or indeed to join the Royal Air Force. But I think it's suffice to say, by the age of 12 to 15, I was thinking about flying morning, night, and day, really.
Yeah. When did you actually get your hands on an aeroplane?
I got my hands on an aeroplane as an air cadet. I was at the then RAF Manston in Kent, and I flew a chipmunk. Not for long, it must be only a matter of minutes. Tremendous experience to be able to do that, to loop and roll over the Kent coastline. And then my parents managed to scrabble together some money to get me one lesson in a Cessna from RAF Biggin Hill. And after those two experiences, I realised that if there was any way I could be paid to do something like this, it'd be tremendous. But it didn't come easy. It took me 3 times to get to the RAF. So there was a long time from those days of kind of inspiration to actually achieving the aim of getting into the service and then formally entering the RAF training system.
So this was via Manchester University. Of course, you were at the Manchester University Air Squadron, and then you get into Cranwell. When did you know you were actually going into fast jets? Because, as you say, there's so many different aspects of aviation. You could have ended up as a helicopter pilot. How did you end up being, well, let's face it, a Top Gun in the elite? It may not be presented like that, but that's how outsiders see it. This is really what everyone thinks of as an RAF pilot being.
Well, I was streamed, as we call it, graded at my university flight. Now, I had no commitment to join the RAF at university, and yet I was in the weekday living the life of an art student in Manchester in the mid 1990s, full of the cultural explosion that was the Northwest, which was terrific. And then I would completely morph into a young RAF officer cadet, go to RAF Woodvale near Southport in the Northwest, and start to learn to fly. It took me some time, I think, to manage to live both of those worlds properly. But we did the first Easter camp of flying, 2 weeks of pure once, twice a day. And in that first year, that's when I realized that I had a little bit of aptitude, or more importantly, my instructors realized I had some aptitude. And I could see the seriousness of what I was doing, that I was being graded on every sortie. And after 80 of them, luckily, I made it into the top 10 to 15% of gradings, and then got stream fast jet as I approached Cranwell.
Yeah, and from then on into the Red Arrows for your first stint. I just want to talk a little bit here about something we were, when we were chatting earlier, this tradition of aerobatic flying in the RAF, of formation flying, very, very important part of its history, not just in terms of its sort of operational preparations, but also the way it shows itself to the public.
This is one element of writing the book that I have found fascinating, and that's the utility of display flying, the necessary element of formation flying for the RAF, or indeed as it was back in the Air Ministry, to communicate with the British public. So whether it's in the 1920s, where around 45,000 people were coming to RAF Hendon, it was a means, I think, at the time to convince the public that these new air systems were going to be probably quite useful. And then if you fast forward to pre-Second World War, the mid-1930s, again, the utility of being able to do formation aerobatic flying, to demonstrate to the public that we should invest in this technology. We should keep pushing forward to drive technology faster than any potential adversary was really important. And also in times of defence cuts, not just build-up. I think post-World War II, and you look at the Battle of Britain days, where I think over 1 million people were coming to RAF stations to see those air events. Again, it was really important to the RAF in particular to try and not lose too much of the traction they'd gained, particularly in technological advancement, because the jet age was burgeoning at the time. We needed to keep moving forward as we then entered the Cold War era. So understanding that context of what we do as we call it a defence communications aspect, hasn't changed in 2022. When we fly down the Mall, like exactly a week ago today, the emotional connection, the sight, the smell, and observing young men and service women prepare the aircraft, engineer the aircraft, and then fly the aircraft, it's still really important. It's still really important that the public get to see this at home and not just read about it in most of our deployed operations.
Absolutely. Now, something that struck me in the book was the way that you link the historical flying with what you do today. And something that surprised me was that, with all the computerization, airplanes can basically fly themselves. But nonetheless, the skills that are needed to be an aerobatic pilot, to be a Red Arrow, are pretty much the same ones from the early days of aviation. Tell us a bit more about that.
I think that is one of the most fascinating and enjoyable parts of the job for pilots coming to the Red Arrows today. The pilots we recruit come from operational squadrons, or they've at a minimum done one operational tour, and now they're coming from aircraft fourth and fifth generation, as we call it, Typhoon, Joint Strike Fighter, Lightning aircraft, where it's very much about operating a weapons system. The control column, the throttle, probably has 30 to 40 different functions at your fingertips as a minimum. And yet you come to join the Red Arrows, and we have a mechanical rudder system, basic hydraulic system to control the flying control surfaces. And there's only really 3 buttons you need to press, and that's red, white, and blue for the smoke. And yet that can be really demanding, for these seasoned fast jet pilots, because the hand-eye coordination that we train very carefully, a building block approach as we go through the training season leading up to the display season. Well, I was just explaining how no matter how much technology is at the fingertips, I think, of the frontline fighter pilots, the hand-eye coordination, the cognitive build-up that is required to fly formation aerobatics really safely, and then to the standard required, the benchmark that we have in the Red Arrows, is certainly one of the best parts of the job.
Yeah. Tell us something about the special skills that you need. You mentioned, obviously, terrific. You've got to have terrific reactions. You've got to have amazing eyesight. How do they all come together in the perfect pilot?
Well, for a start, there are very few perfect pilots out there. That's the joy of aviation. On one day you might be almost perfect, on another day not quite so much. That's something that we've really enjoyed in any squadron environment, particularly the team environment in the Red Arrows, because the element of the training mechanism we have, we fly 3 times a day, Monday to Friday, in the work up to the display season. And that conditions the pilot in particular to be able to build on the skill set, to condition the brain to be able to deal with the complexities of what is one of the most demanding formation aerobatic shows in the world. That's the benchmark that we have set over the 58 seasons that we've had in the Red Arrows. And I think that process that runs from about October through to May in the following year, you watch, as I said, a seasoned frontline pilot become a very competent and able formation aerobatic pilot. And with Red One's role in that, ultimately choreographing, building the training plan day by day, where we accelerate, then we plateau, we have performance dips. That, I think, is a really fulfilling aspect of being the team leader, because you're responsible for making sure the team safely gets through that process. And I suppose for those listening that come from all organisations, we lose 2 to 3 pilots a year. They are posted back into frontline squadrons. So we lose our most experienced, and yet we recruit 2 or 3 new pilots, but are still expected to meet the output that has been set. So that the skills and the training element in the winter months are really, really important for us.
Yeah, you might think this is a male preserve, but that this is not the case, is it?
No, not at all. We have women pilots across the service. One of my very good friends, that was a Tornado pilot, Kirsty Murphy, joined the team when I was a junior pilot and on my first tour. And we have women leaders across the squadron. Our leader of the engineers that deploys with the aircraft and sits in the back seat for the transit sorties. She's just been qualified, so has been away for 6 weeks, and we had a very emotional return when we came back to the UK 2 weeks ago, with her catching up with her two young children. So with that, it's very much kind of parity across the squadron in terms of our gender ratio.
Yeah, no, I was very intrigued to hear that when you're selecting a pilot, it's a kind of group effort. And so the team plays a vital part in actually ushering the new replacement pilots in. Can you explain a bit more about how that happens?
Yes, we have a quite demanding selection profile. It's 7 days worth of selection, 7-day interview, if you like. And we roughly get 20 applications a year from the front line and training units. We objectively then grade their performance over their career, and we bring 7 to 9 pilots with us out to the final 5 weeks of training. And in that 7 days, they have formal assessments, formal interview, a flying test, and we also do a mock media interview, because particularly the pilots that join, and in fact for everyone on the squadron, we expect them to be able to communicate across society, across spectrum. That's one of the best bits of the job. And after 2 to 3 days, there's only so much of a cloak that you can really wear. People will start to show their true character. So we very much look at the formal aspects, the conscious bias when we select our pilots. But in that regard, it's not to pick people that are models of our own by any means. We are looking to select diverse characters. We're looking to select people that in 2 or 3 years' time will be exceptional leaders in the team that mentor and guide the new pilots. And different thought processes, different motivation levels, they're really important for us. I think that really helps us evolve year on year and be as creative, as safe, but yet as creative as possible.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of that aspect of it before, but clearly the team ethos is very, very important. As if you're going to succeed, there's got to be complete trust. But you also mentioned the word humility, and that struck me as being interesting as well. You've got to be able to kind of learn from your mistakes. There's no room for arrogance, I imagine.
Not at all. Not at all. The only way that we can perform consistently over 60 to 80 public displays in 4 to 5 months is that when we get to the analysis of each performance, of each display, that we create an environment where every single one of the pilots can be as honest about their own performance, to demonstrate to their peers and to the team leader that they have an emotional competence which is good enough to assess their own performance, and indeed to look out for their peers as well, because on some days you may be at the top of the game, on other days not quite so much. But that's where we kind of unite as a team to make sure that we're as constantly driving for perfection, and that only comes with stripping any ego out of what we do and making sure that, and I think that element of humility is one of the fundamental aspects to driving a kind of positive and healthy culture. And that's not just for the Red Arrows. I think that's probably synonymous with any team in high performance environment.
Now, when we're looking and marveling at these incredibly intricate maneuvers, the first thing I think everyone asks themselves is how on earth do you design that display? What are the actual mechanics of making that display work?
The first thought, particularly, and it's Red One that does the choreography first and foremost, is that you want to keep the display as safely close to the audience as possible. And we call that a tight display. So you don't want to choreograph a show where you disappear for a minute and a half and then come back in another shape. In the Red Arrows, we pride ourselves by always making sure there is something going on in front of the viewer. And particularly in the second half of the show, where we make it really dynamic and we split the sections up, we have intricate timing so that the front section will come through, perform a dynamic maneuver, whilst the rear section is probably on a 8-mile ground track on a stopwatch and a map to make sure that they arrive 1 or 2 seconds within this time-bounded handover of contract. I think from the team leader's perspective, from Red One's perspective, it's an obsession. I was drawing shapes on all sorts of napkins and papers when I was away with the family. You're always looking to try and create something new, which is quite difficult. There's been 58 seasons worth of Red Arrows displays with some great ideas, probably some not so great ideas. We actually have what's called a display directive, where every maneuver that has been flown and has been risk analysed sits there in a binder, and you can reference what has been done before, try and modify it, or indeed try and create something very new. But when it comes together, when the 3 months of training a new maneuver comes together, and particularly the enthusiasts see that in the season, that's a great feeling, I think, to be able to deliver as a team leader and then as a team itself.
Now, with all the safety considerations in place, nonetheless, accidents do happen, sometimes fatally. And you were there on that tragic day in August 2001 when your friend John Egging, Flight Lieutenant John Egging, crashed and died at the Bournemouth Air Festival. That must have been a terrible moment for you, for the team, for the spectators. How did it affect you?
Well, first and foremost, for his widow, his Dr. Emma Egging, who was actually at the air show at the time. So the impact to her and the team is something that we shared in the immediate aftermath very closely. For us as a military unit, we underwent what any accident or incident goes through in terms of a service inquiry. That no stone is left unturned, and the analysis conducts itself with the board of investigation. Very quickly, we were given the sanction to get back in the air. So within under 3 weeks, we were back flying the aircraft and managed to finish that season without Flight Lieutenant Egging. I mean, as you can imagine, an incredibly emotional time. But again, I think from a military perspective, we felt that was the right thing to do. Was to continue, partly to honour him, and we never forget who the audience is. The general public, after John's death, and indeed later that year Sean Cunningham's death, was phenomenally supportive. The accident occurred in Bournemouth. The local, the regional population rallied around us, around the service, and that was a huge driver for us to make sure that we would continue that season. And indeed, thereon, and And that replays in history. I think over the few but tragic accidents that the team has experienced, the general public support has always been there, and it's something we never ever take for granted and very much value.
Yeah, and you were involved yourself in a mid-air collision with your colleague Mike Ling. I think that was just a year before. That must have given you pause. No, was it difficult for you to get back into the cockpit after that?
In some ways, it was. I had one single motivation, and that was not to let the team down. And that's how I felt after the mid-air collision. I thought, well, I've put the team's training and our output and the audience under threat here, and that drove me back into the cockpit very quickly. I had great support from my immediate and very senior leadership in the RAF, which I've always valued, because I was able to give back. Years later, myself and Mike came back to the team. Mike Ling was the individual that I had a mid-air collision with,
Mm-hmm.
and as team leader, and he was senior supervisor, we led the team to China and back for its very first time right across the world. So that was it was a difficult period. I've written for the first time. That was quite a difficult part to write, but I've communicated that with many people in the service. I just hadn't communicated much to the public. So yeah, that was good for me to put down, and very much shapes, of course, those single incidents shape how you then operate in the future, particularly the mandate that we carry and I carry in terms of our risk analysis, making sure that everything is risk management wise is absolutely where it should be. And I think we were very unlucky on that day, and also very lucky to have ultimately stepped away from it, although Mike was badly injured, but back flying within 6 months.
Yeah, I think in the case of John Egging, the inquiry found that Gforces played a part in causing the accident. I don't think we can really imagine the stresses and strains that are put on not just your mental faculties but your body in this kind of flying. Can you describe that for us?
Indeed, well, G-force is one of the many risks that we have to manage as a fighter pilot. The modern day fighter Typhoon, you're manoeuvring up to 9 times the force of gravity, and that is exceptionally demanding, particularly on the neck, on the internal organs. They get all shifted around inside as you're going into air combat manoeuvring. But of course, to be able to be conditioned and ready for that, we go through a really stringent training mechanism in the RAF. We have a wonderful, world-renowned unit, the Centre of Aviation Medicine in the RAF, that take you through the academic process of medically what does happen to the body, what you should do to prepare. We then go through physical tests where we induce hypoxia in an individual to work out what your symptoms are, and then for combating the stress of G-force are fly to describe it in a state-of-the-art centrifuge that spins you up to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9G, and with medical specialists, clinical specialists, talk about what's going on at the time, so that when you enter a cockpit, and then ultimately if you're engaged in air combat for real, everything is second nature. The body is as conditioned as it can be to perform that duty.
Wow. Can we move on to talk a little bit about your operational history? You were in Afghanistan for Operation Herrick, and I believe attached to the US Marine Corps.
Yes, I was. In 2011, I left the Red Arrows, and within 8 months, I was deployed to Afghanistan, which is exactly how it should be. You are always shifted out of your comfort zone in the service of the military, particularly the RAF. And I was a liaison officer for the US Marine Corps in Helmand Province. And it wasn't a flying role, but all of the work that I did on the ground with the US Marines, particularly the air wings, all the aviation centered. We were bending down new assets into country, dealing with various reaction crises around the region. tracking a lot of the kinetic activity that was going on. I was extremely privileged to then fly out to two US aircraft carriers to brief some squadrons on what was happening in theatre. So, yeah, from looping and rolling over the south coast and the Scottish coast of UK, immediately into Helmand, spent 6 months there, and in many ways, it was so different from the previous role. It was almost a complete same tempo but different context. Really good for me to do, and a time that I think everyone that has served on those that era, particularly in Afghanistan and Iraq, reflect upon today. But yes, a very important part of my military service.
Yeah, I was in Afghanistan myself a couple of times in that period, and it seemed a bit anachronistic with these, fast jets, incredibly expensive machines, up against guys basically in flip flops and carrying Kalashnikov rifles. And it seemed, I think, quite a lot of people were saying to themselves, is the day of the fast jet over? Yet what we're seeing now in Ukraine tells us that you could never write off any bit of kit or claim that military engineering has gone too far and too high tech. When you're looking at those scenes in Ukraine, what are you thinking?
Well, you are absolutely right. You always need to be on the forefront of technology. I talked about that from the 1920s and 1930s, touched upon how important that was in that context. And today it's ever more present. You, I think, from a military capability perspective, are just making sure that you are always ready for the unknown, always ready to be able to deliver ultimately a lethality as best as you can, because unfortunately, as we have seen in the last few weeks and few months, there is an ever-present danger, and being ready is the key in that regard.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. It's you can never say what's going to happen in this world, and Ukraine is a good example of that. To get back to the Red Arrows, now this is a great instrument of soft power, isn't it, in Britain's armory? Can you tell us the kind of reception that you get when you fly around the world? You've been all over the place, China in recent years, which was a first. What message do you think the Red Arrows are sending?
Well, the great thing about flying the Hawk is that we can operate almost anywhere in the world. The team has got itself to the south of Australia. I was very fortunate to lead the team in an Indo-Pacific tour some years ago, right across India, Bangladesh, into China, and the last very large tour was 2019, when my predecessor took the team across to North America, Canada and North America. We are, as a soft power, we're just a really good excuse to get people in the room, to convene, whether it is 100,000 people or 6 very important people. Or perhaps the example I used maybe last year we were part of the G7 Carbis Bay conference, where you just had those leaders, after I think very intense negotiations, out to have a barbecue in the beautiful blue sky of Cornwall, and we were used as one instrument of diplomatic, British diplomacy, where our senior supervisor was held by his shoulders by President Biden and talked about his perception of the UK and US military. So you can go from a President of the United States to convening school children around the coastline of the UK. It's a wonderful part of the job. As a soft power capability, we can pretty much perform this anywhere in the world. As I've said, linking with other government departments, with the UK embassy in a certain country, we will build an engagement plan formulated around perhaps a display or a fly past, but then most importantly, carrying whatever message we need to carry in that country, whatever national objective we might have, whether that's in academia, whether it might be a military message, it might be more political. For us, we just make sure that the spectacle demonstrates the professionalism, the skill set of our armed forces personnel, and then, you know, very subtly meet people on the ground, do presentations, whether it's about leadership, whether it's about teamwork, and let the events unfold from there on. And it's a very unique aspect of service life. I hadn't experienced much of this at all as a fighter pilot. Hence why the people that we recruit and select have to be good communicators in that regard. And I think everyone walks, back into traditional RAF life with a very different perspective of the world, I think, after time with this team.
It does always come back to the spectacle, though, doesn't it? I mean, unless you're producing this fantastic display, then you can have all the soft power you like, but it's not really going to work. Have you invented any maneuvers yourself? Is it a kind of something that a pilot would strive to do, to think, I want to, part of my legacy will be, there'll be a move that will be forever associated with me? I mean, did someone like Ray Hanna, did he put his name to kind of famous aerobatic, we used the word choreography, but dances, I suppose?
There are formation shapes that Ray Hanna and his counterparts from the late 1960s and early 1970s we still fly today, which is tremendous. A lot of the operating procedures are very, very close, if not some of them identical, because they were seasoned fighter pilots, formation aerobatic pilots. We have evolved, and every leader tries to bring something new within his or her 3 years. The manoeuvre I think I'm probably most proud of is something called Tornado. In my time, the Tornado aircraft was about to come out of service, and it'd been on 30 years of continual operational service, and we wanted to honour that. So there's a manoeuvre at the end of the first half of the display that is the most dynamic first half manoeuvre that we do. It took a long time to train up. We almost didn't get there. We were thrown a lot of hours at the manoeuvre, and the Red 8 and 9 of the time, Mike Bowden and Emmett Cox, within about 2 sorties, got it. I said, that's it, we've got one more day, and then I think we're going to have to scrap it. They shut the door of the office. They said, leave it with us, boss. And the next day it worked. I don't know what they had discussed with each other. But from then on, we have flown that, and it's captured so much imagery over the years. Personally, I find that very fulfilling, and every leader has that element. Every leader has a shape or a certain element of choreography that they've designed that you see the legacy continue, and it's really good to watch, and it will. I hope Tornado stays in the show. It will be for the life of the team.
Brilliant. What next then, Monty? You're well into your term as OC. What would be the natural development for you, your next posting or your next area of service?
Well, that's a timely question because I'm talking to my posting officer tomorrow morning, so I might get more of an idea. I don't know, but as I said earlier, you're always taken out of your comfort zone. I think in a good way. So it's likely that I will probably go into what's called a staff role, and that may see me work within the MOD, maybe within policy in the MOD. I might deploy out to one of the NATO jobs that we have. Of course, that's extremely important right now, so I would look forward to something like that. But I don't have an answer yet, Patrick. So maybe next week, if you'd ask me the question, I could give you a definitive.
Okay, well, I'm sure you'll do brilliantly well, whatever it is. Well, that's enough for me now. We've got lots of questions rolling in here. So, Monty, I'm going to pass these over to you. I've got one here, so it's a bit obscured by something on the screen. I can't see the top one there. Maybe if I can move that down. No, it's not going to work. Now we've got a rather technical one here from Scott, who's ex-UGSAS. I take it that's a US Air Force display team. He asks, was there any merit in the 1980s Hoyik T-1A air defense program concept, matching the Hawks armed with sidewinders and cannon with the Tornado F3 and its radar. Now that's double Dutch to me, but perhaps it makes sense to you.
I think he's referencing the short period that we were ultimately the Hawk was going to be used as a last ditch point defence fighter. The Hawk is designed as a fast jet training aircraft. In fact, it's the most successful fast jet training aircraft ever in production. It's been sold to across the world as that type of capability, and at that time, it was decided that if you did put Sidewinder short range missiles onto it, used our airspace battle management system, our radar system, it could be used as a point defence fighter. It never was. It was never needed to be, and I think it was quite a very short-term program in that regard. When the Tornado F3 became ever more capable, it just wasn't needed from the Hawk.
We've got a much easier one next from Oliver and James, aged 8 and 6. How fast do the Red Arrows fly?
Well, we take off at around 130 knots, 150 miles an hour. We cruise around at 360 to 400 miles per hour. Most of the display, so when Red 1 pulls up for a loop, the aiming point is around 360 to 370 knots. And when you get to the top of a loop, you've climbed roughly 5,500 to 6,000 feet, and you've slowed right down to about 120 knots. So the way that you fly the aircraft is quite different at the top of the loop than it is at the bottom of a loop. And we pull around 3 to 4.5 G in those maneuvers. Now the aircraft can go supersonic, and we used to do this when I was a young student pilot. You'd have to climb it up to 42,000 feet, turn it upside down, put it in a 60 degrees nose dive, and at full power, the thing would shudder itself through Mach 1 momentarily before you had to do a recovery. And that was quite an experience, actually, in a Hawk. Far easier when you're flying a frontline fighter and you've got lots of afterburner available. But around 350 to 400 miles an hour is our comfortable space in the aircraft.
Radio. And an anonymous questioner, what's the highest G-force you have personally ever experienced?
I would say I was very lucky to fly in a F-18 in Canada when I was at the NATO training school. And I think we were flying around 8.5 G quite consistently in some of the air combat manoeuvring. Typhoon pilots of today were flying up to 9 G. The kit, the anti-G trousers that you wear, the pressure breathing and the jackets, they help the body. But for me personally, around 8.5. Yet in the centrifuge, that state-of-the-art capability that we have here in the UK, I have been spun around to 9G, and that was pretty painful. But luckily, it didn't last than a few minutes. So I wouldn't like to do that every day.
What is there a point beyond that when it becomes fatal?
Well, there is an element where it does, but it's very much down to the individual and how the individual is conditioned. For the aircraft, the human is probably the greatest limitation in that regard. The aircraft can be stressed, as we call it, designed to withstand higher G than that. But indeed, it's the physicality, that the musculoskeletal system has to be as conditioned as possible to deal with that.
Right. Now, here's an interesting one.
I'm sorry, Pat, I seem to have lost the link very briefly there. Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, so the question was, if apart from the Red Arrows, is there another aerobatic team from around the world that you would be happy to be a member of?
Well, I would love to fly for any aerobatic team. I think we're really close to our European partners. So with the Patrouille de France, the French team, French Tricolore, the Italian team, I think flying 7 to 9 to 10 aircraft, we have quite a similar outlook in the way that we train and deliver formation aerobatics. Been very lucky enough to fly with both teams in the back seat, and often we trade a lot of knowledge, particularly around how to keep the team safe and share experiences in that regard. And if I had to pick one, I'd be very difficult indeed. I love the flamboyance of the Italian team. I love the clinical precision of the Swiss team. But I think in many ways, having flown with them, it would be. We've never had an exchange pilot. It's not something that we do. Something that's been discussed but never happened. But probably flying with the Tour de France would be a wonderful experience.
Now, a question about the Hawk. The Hawk's getting on a bit now, isn't it? It's 46, 47 years old. And so Neil asks, will the Red Arrows continue to fly the Hawk T1, or will the aircraft be replaced eventually with a proposed Aeralis jet?
Well, we will be flying the Hawk T1 to 2030 as a minimum. Yes, the aircraft is old, but it's incredibly serviceable. Have wonderful engineers and a construct around the engineers that keeps the platform airworthy. So I think we do have the highest serviceability rate across the platforms in the RAF. So even though it's venerable aircraft, it's engineering simple, wonderfully designed, and will see us good at least for the next 8 to 9 years. Now, in terms of what next, it's not something that I've got an answer on. I'm not sure. There has been talk about Aeralis, their concept fast jet design element, but what comes next isn't decided yet. I believe that decision probably needs to be made within 2 years' time to give us a fighting chance, and I very much hope it does. As I've said, the utility of formation aerobatic flying will endure, so I do hope there is a capability after Hawk.
Okay, well, that's all we've got time for this evening. Thank you very much indeed. If you weren't one of the first 100 subscribers to RSVP and claim a free copy of Monty's book, you could of course buy it from all good book retailers, including the Telegraph Bookshop. You'll actually receive a special 20% discount code from Telegraph Bookshop tomorrow morning if you can wait until then. And in the same email, you'll receive a link to a survey, so please let us know how you found this evening. Now keep an eye out for Telegraph Extra on the Telegraph Extra website for more subscriber exclusive offers, events and competitions. It was a real pleasure and a privilege to have Monty with us tonight. Thank you very much indeed for your time, and thank you all for looking in. Good evening.